Hello, KMMU. This is and Main Street Media Utah. This is Main Street Media Utah on KMMU, and I am your host, John. A Talk with John. Tuesdays, typically from about 4 to 6 p.m. You can catch me live here. Now, you can join me live on Twitter. You can, as where we are posting this live. You can also catch me on YouTube, Rumble, and our homepage, mainstreetmedia.org. mainstreetmediautah.org, if I remember correctly. All right, so a little bit later, around 4:30ish, I'm going to be having David Pyne join me, and we're going to be talking about a number of different topics. We're going to be talking about what's happening as far as the wonderful pardons that happened and the not so wonderful pardons. And then we're going to be talking about what his thoughts are on, could we get Canada? Might we get Greenland? What might be coming our way along those lines? So, folks, this is, as I said, it's Talk with John. So before we get going any further, though, I would like to give out the show prayer and the show mantra. Now, remember, folks, I don't live up to this daily, but this is what I try to live up to when I'm doing my show. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra: where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty, and the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. Now, let's get going. Oh, also, just so you know, the live call-in number is 385-889-2134, and you are listening live to KMMU, Main Street Media Utah. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, X/Twitter, and our website, kmmu.org. All right, what I want to do real quickly before we get rolling is I want to pull up, I'm going to have Dwayne play a little segment from the mainstream lame media, but let's play what happened yesterday because it matters. Hit it, Dwayne.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world.
Well, I'm going to say I think Carrie Underwood did a great job in her rendition of that wonderful song of ours. Now, I was sitting there watching it. My family, my children that are at home, that is, and under the age of 18. And I was sitting there watching that. And when Carrie Underwood sang that song, I was right before, when there was a little bit of a shuffle trying to figure out what was happening. I was like, doesn't the band have this song basically memorized, the military band that they had playing? I was like, they could do an instrumental and back her up, but I thought it was perfect. It was great to hear the crowd join in. She invited the crowd to join her. She handled that very well, like a pro. Incredible rendition. It's something that I will remember. So let me start here. Interesting how it went indoors. You know how it was really, really cold, and they said they're moving it indoors because it was so cold. We're going to have, as I shared, we're going to have David Pyne joining us in a little bit. I'm going to get his thoughts on that. But Michael Letts, I had a chat with him today and just said, what do you think? What are your thoughts with why they moved that indoors? And he goes, John, I didn't go to Washington, D.C. because there was risks of attack, very serious risks. And moving that indoors, fortunately, was the key that kept people safe. Now, my understanding is also there was the seating out in the, that they were going to have right there in front of the Capitol in the outdoors. They had to cut that in about half, and boy, that must have been a not so awesome job of figuring out who you were going to cut and who you were going to keep. I don't envy the person that had to make that decision. So that was a little bit of a hard call. But bottom line is, I think that was the smartest thing all along. In fact, I remember thinking even a week or two before, I was like, I don't think this is a great idea to hold this outdoors. If we were to get, if there's going to be attack on President Trump, something tells me it's going to be basically pretty much right then. So, bottom line, really grateful that there were some wise people who said, let's go ahead and get that indoors. Really glad that that happened. So, also curious how you folks would be happy to hear from the listening audience. Today, we'll have lines that you can call in. The call-in live line is 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. Also, you can join us in the chat. I believe the feed comes from X, but the bottom line is I don't know exactly where it comes from. So bottom line, I look forward to possibly hearing from you today, but we will have David Pyne also. So I want to go over just a couple of things. I want to know what your thoughts. I'll be sharing my thoughts today, and also I'm going to be listening to my guest thoughts on all the pardons. It was Pardon Day in America yesterday, as I sent over X. So I will be curious to hear your thoughts should you choose to call in 385-899-2134. And we'll be having David Pyne join us around 4:30. I can't guarantee that he will be right at 4:30. He might be at 4:31. He might even be at 4:41 and maybe even 4:51. We'll take him when we get him. But I would love to hear my producer's thoughts. And Dwayne, what are your thoughts on all those pardons that happened yesterday? The pre-pardons, and then the actual pardons that happened by Trump.
Well, it was a wild show, John, and I got a little piece here. Let's see if I can pop this up for you from the AP, our illustrious mainstream media. Let's try this because share screen. Here you go, and so. Can you see this? It's probably a little small. Let's see if I can make it a little
It's
bigger.
a little small for my eyes, I must admit.
It's small. It's really small for my eyes, but I'm looking at there. How's that?
Can you read it? Because
I
can't.
I can. Yeah. I mean, this is about Joe Biden. Okay. And what it says is Joe Biden, in one of his final acts as president, pardoned Dr. Anthony Fauci, retired General Mark Milley, and members of the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack. I don't know how you can pardon somebody who hasn't been convicted of something, but it says in an extraordinary use of executive power to guard against potential revenge by the new Trump administration. The decision Monday by Biden came after now President Donald Trump had warned of an enemies list. I don't remember hearing about that, but filled with those who have crossed him politically. Okay. And the idea is that, you know, these people, he's protecting them. And I mean, but I don't know how you can pardon somebody who hasn't been convicted of a crime. So to me, what that says is these people must have done something wrong. It's like an admission of guilt, you know?
And let's not forget a bunch of family members, like literally like minutes before he was no longer going to be president.
Yeah, that was the last thing he did. He released those pardons on for his family. And it's like, really? But then you got to look at the other side. I mean, Trump pardoned all the J6 offenders. Okay. And I'm all for that. I'm not really sure I'm for pardoning somebody who hasn't done anything wrong, or who hasn't been indicted or convicted. It's just craziness, but it's crazy on both sides. I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I am certainly happy that those people that were in prison in DC have been released after 4 years, and maybe there were a few of them that were violent and they should have had consequences. But I mean, there were little old ladies, grandmas that got arrested for just walking into the Capitol, not knowing that they were doing anything wrong.
Well, let me throw this out there. Here's the problem with what happened with January 6th. I think it was all a fraudulent prosecution. They didn't really have a fair jury trial. It wasn't a jury of their peers. It was a select jury in an area where 95% of the people that lived in that area voted for Biden, voted Democrat. It was a Democrat-controlled gulag and Democrat-controlled trials. It was a kangaroo court. So one of the things that I was glad to see is Stuart Rhodes was let out of prison. Thank heavens. Bottom line, I don't think he wasn't even at the Capitol. And here's what I would say. I think you release every single one of the J6ers. Flat out pardon, flat out release, unless you say we're going to look at every single person, including law enforcement, to see if they did something. Because I'm going to wager that a number of the people that quote unquote attacked that attacked the government officials, that attacked police, probably were hit first by the police. Now, here's a question that I have. If a cop comes up to you and punches you on the street, do you have the right to punch back? And I think that that's probably what happened with the majority of the people on January 6th. Also, I bet you there were a bunch of I think I've shared this with you. I know I've shared this with the audience before, and I don't think, unfortunately, I don't have a recording of him doing this. But I had John Statmiller, who founded Republic Broadcasting, and passed away. I want to say it was in November of 2001 or 2002. I can't remember. November 5th, I want to say. And he shared with me before. Right, like he called me either the day, I want to say it was the day of or the day after January 6th, and he said, John, he goes, I saw small buses being led by a police escort or law enforcement escort to the front of the Capitol steps. The people filed out of the van, and he goes, they looked nothing like any of the Trump, the people that support Trump supporters around me. Went right up to the Capitol. We saw him go up the Capitol steps, and then shortly after they disappeared, we heard we were able to tell that something had happened up at the Capitol doors, and people started going in. And he goes, John, those people did not look like anybody that was a supporter surrounding me. And the fact that they were led by the police and they went right up there sounds, it was absolutely fishy. So the bottom line, in his opinion, and then I've had Michael Letts has said this, and I've had others on my different programs that have said there were people let there to create havoc. So
well, and just to add to that, there's speculation and some evidence and some whistleblowers who said that the FBI was there instigating things, I mean, and there's always Ray Epps, and I keep wondering about him. He sure seemed like a plant to me. And one of the things that Kash Patel said is,
well, okay, so he seems like a plant because nothing happened to him. He was on their list of 10 or 20 most wanted.
He was on the 10 most wanted list one day, and the next day he was off. And Kash Patel says that doesn't happen. Kash Patel worked for the FBI. He says that doesn't happen. So kind of makes you question, okay? And a a lot of these people were arrested on misdemeanor offenses, trespassing offenses, or disturbing the peace, and they're in jail for 4 years for disturbing the peace and misdemeanor that maybe you should have got a fine for and been released the next day. And yes, there were some bad people. There were bad actors. But on one side of the building, there were peaceful protesters. On the other side, it got a little raucous. It turned into a not so peaceful protest.
And we know that evidence was shared, testimony was shared before the January 6th committee, and that evidence disappeared.
Well, that's why Joe had to pardon them, okay? Because that is a felony. Destroying evidence and public records, that's a felony. What happened to those records?
So the bottom line is, if you are destroying evidence, so if evidence is being destroyed and evidence is not being given to the defendants when a prosecution is being, when prosecutors are going after them, the bottom line is, to me, just right there, in alone, on its face, everyone that was convicted probably should be at least their sentences commuted, if not flat out pardoned.
Well, that's what Trump did yesterday. 16 or 1,700 people were released.
So I want to give a couple headlines. I want to read a couple headlines. Here, Stuart Rhodes was being released, and he called to announce that he was released. He had never went inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. So just a couple things about him. He had like an 18-year prison sentence. He never went inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. He never instructed anyone to go in the U.S. Capitol. He was unarmed, as were all Oath Keeper associates that day. They left their weapons outside the city in their hotel rooms. There was no plan to enter the U.S. Capitol. The few Oath Keepers who entered the U.S. Capitol assisted police. There was no scheme to take over the government with their bare hands. There were no pre-planning meetings on how they were going to take over the Capitol. The persecution was a sham. There was no evidence of an insurrection at all, and the jury was a pool of D.C. communists and unhinged left-wing activists who see themselves as victims. Okay, so I want to dive into just that kind of the second to last thing. And
well, let me add one other thing. Let me add one other thing, because it wasn't just Rhodes. It was Enrico Tarrio. What's his name?
Rico, the guy that was over
Enrique Tarrio. He wasn't even
correct.
in Washington.
Yeah, he wasn't in Washington when it happened.
They're free now, the two of them, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers.
A journalist who never went in the Capitol, Owen Schroyer of InfoWars, never went in the Capitol, and he went to jail for 4 months. I mean, it's just it. So to me, on its face, all of these people should be released. They should be almost every single one of them should be pardoned. And the bottom line is, even a few of the Antifa people, if they were there and they were causing problems, there's a part of me that says they need to be released too, because it's almost impossible to know who was the good and who was the bad. And we know this for a fact. They're not doing anything to try and let out the true information of what happened. So the bottom line is, we've got some real dirty actors back there in Washington, D.C., and I am glad that we got Donald Trump in office. Here's my concern.
One of the things he said yesterday, President Trump, after he said that, this whole scenario was just part of the plan to make Trump look bad. Okay. And it's been just one thing after another, starting with, the Russiagate and the spying on Trump, and it just went on, and the impeachment trials and this and that. And then finally you get closer to the end and they try to assassinate him. Somebody did. I mean, Tucker Carlson had a great interview with somebody who has been studying the whole. It was in Pennsylvania. I forget what county it was where he had his rally, and this guy's been following up and trying to find information on the shooter. Can't find anything. Amazing. The FBI couldn't dig up something on this kid. Okay, and so it's just one thing after another.
Yes. So the bottom line is this: what happened at the Capitol was not an insurrection. It takes firearms. I talked with a Marine. I interviewed a Marine on K-Talk Radio, who was if I remember correctly, ex-Marine, and he was, I believe, a captain in the Marines, and he was out at the he would go to the embassies. He was stationed in different embassies, and he's like, an insurrection takes firearms. That's another thing. None of these people were ever accused of having any type of weapon, any type of firearm.
You can't get into the city of Washington, D.C. with a firearm.
Right. And none of them went in the Capitol. And then on top of that, the other problem that we know is that we know that the FBI had assets, whatever you want to call them, whether it actually be FBI or other type of assets. They were there in the crowd.
Let's call them paid informants. How's that?
At the very least, paid informants. I personally believe that I believe it just wasn't the FBI. I believe that there were other actors there. If I remember correctly, Alex Jones has said several times on his radio show, people have sent me clips where Alex Jones quotes some of his security force that are former special forces that came across and was like, "Hey, Bob, what are you doing here?" So his security, let's say that his security guy was Larry. And he says, "Hey, Bob, what are you doing here? Aren't you active duty?" And he's like, "Yeah, just keeping an eye on things, So,
well, and just to be clear, David Pyne has arrived. Just to be
yes,
clear,
David Pyne. We're
speculating here. We're speculating here, John, and this is our opinion. But there sure is a preponderance of evidence. There are fact patterns that people have testified to. So, yes, we're speculating, but there sure is a lot of evidence.
Definitely tons of circumstantial evidence. And that's another reason why I'm glad David Pyne's here, and I will be I'll do an introduction here in just a moment. So
I'm gonna bow out, John, and let you guys talk. Okay.
I was going to say, Dwayne, do you have anything else you want to share before you drop off?
No, I've said too much already.
Okay. All right. Well, Dwayne, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
I'll be monitoring for calls.
Appreciate it. So, speaking of calls, as folks can see down at the bottom of the Chiron, down there at the bottom, it has a telephone number 385-899-2134. Feel free to give us a call and ask David any questions. It's been a while since we've had a phone call, so if we don't get one, David and I can chew the fat plenty good. So, David, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here, my friend.
Hey, John. Happy New Year. Great to be on.
Well, Happy New Year to you, my friend. Okay, so let's get this going. I want to, and where, for heaven's sakes, I need to find your bio, and I thought I had it pulled up, but give me just a moment. There we go. All right. So, folks, right now joining me, we have David Pyne, and David T. Pyne Esquire is a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters Staff Officer who is in charge of armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Americas from 2000 to 2003. He has an MA in National Security Studies from Georgetown. He is a former president and current deputy executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He also serves as a member of the Committee on Present Danger China. He recently served as Defense and Foreign Policy Advisor to former Republican president candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He also co-authored the best-selling new book, Catastrophe Now, America's Last Chance to Avoid an EMP Disaster, and his new book, Restoring Strategic Deterrence, should be out is it out already, David?
No, it's coming out at the end of March. So end of March, early April.
And he is the editor of the Real War newsletter at dpyne.substack.com. Now, let me spell that out for you, folks, so you can really look that up. dpyne.substack.com. And he's been a contributor on the National Interest, as well as he's a contributor monthly here on Talk with John, and we're so grateful for him joining us today. So, David, I want to say thank you for joining us, my friend.
Great to be with you.
All right, so there's like 3 different areas that we want to hit. You put out on January 8th, folks. If you need to go to Substack and look for his Substack, Pyne, dpyne.substack.com. You want to go and you want to find his Substack. It's just a nominal amount every year. It's well worth the spend. It's well worth the time. But on January 8th, he put out How to Make Trump's Proposal on Canada, Greenland, and Panama Canal a Reality. Now, something unfortunately that I was not able to have time to review before we went on air is How to End the Ukraine War. He's got a new stack that's going to be coming out. How to End the Ukraine War in Days, Not Months. And also, I want to get, since it's Esquire, I don't know, you've got your Juris Doctorate at the very least. I can't remember if you are an attorney or not, but I do want to get your opinion on what is on these pardons, on the pardon situation, both with the former President Biden on his way out in last moments, and then also with President Trump giving out a bunch of pardons. So where would you like to start?
Well, let's go ahead and start with the pardons. Joe Biden, of course, pardoned a slew of people, including, I don't know, like 25 convicted murderers, but most notably his own family members, 5 or 6 of his own family members. Of course, Hunter Biden, James Biden, his sister, his brother-in-law, his sister-in-law. I mean, it's what president has ever done this before? No president has ever pardoned so many members of their family. I think maybe Bill Clinton may have pardoned his brother.
I think he did.
Jimmy Carter, I don't know, maybe he did, maybe not. He also had a brother who was a little bit of a troublemaker. Nothing like what we've seen with the Biden crime family. This nothing underscores the fact that the Biden family is a crime family more than these pardons. So, yeah, quite scandalous and something I was expecting, but just the fact that it was done 20 minutes before Trump was inaugurated, I think indicated how ashamed he was of doing this. I think he felt like he had to do it. He knew it'd be a black mark in his presidency. And I think the reason he waited to the last minute is because he knew it was a shameful act.
I want to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole on this with you when it comes to Speaker Mike Johnson. Definitely want to hit his comments that he released, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about his meeting with President Biden. But before we go down, let's also not forget he pardoned Milley. He pardoned all of the January 6th committee. He pardoned, I believe it's Michael Byrd, the one that shot Ashley Babbitt. And I know that I'm missing a few others.
Anthony Fauci, yeah.
Anthony Fauci, that's probably that. that might be. I'm not sure if Milley or Anthony Fauci is the most egregious. Anthony Fauci did the most, but Milley, in my opinion, committed flat out treason as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Uh, I don't see any reason why to pardon him, especially if they've done nothing wrong. Why do you pardon someone if they don't do something wrong? Another person that I am surprised that he did not pardon, though, was Merrick Garland. So, what are your thoughts on those on those pardons?
Well, Fauci, of course, he sent $3.8 million in grant money to EcoHealth, which was then handed it over to the China's notorious bioweapons lab, the Wuhan lab, and that, of course, they used that to develop, for the specific purpose of developing the COVID-19 virus bioweapon that was used to kill 1.2 million Americans deliberately by communist China. So, I mean, I guess I would argue that that's pretty treasonous as well. And certainly, it's something that Fauci should be prosecuted for criminally, and he deserves to spend perhaps the rest of his life in prison. I would say like 20 years, but, given his age, that would essentially be a life sentence.
Right.
With regards to General Milley, I mean, yeah, he committed treason on multiple levels. Very, seditious, incredibly seditious. He was during the last, days or weeks of the Trump presidency. He first tried to, plot a military coup against the sitting president, democratically elected president of the United States. On many levels, he said if Trump didn't leave office, then he might take action, with a military coup, arrest him, whatnot. That would be potential civil war, at the very least, and involving U.S. servicemen shooting at each other to try to defend the president against Milley's unprecedented military coup attempt. And then, of course, he also took the nuclear launch codes and tried to argue that if Trump, if there was a nuclear war and we came under nuclear attack, that they were not to obey the president's orders to launch our nuclear weapons, and therefore we could be nuked and there would be no responses, and that's unprecedented as well, because Milley is outside the nuclear command chain. There's no.
Really?
I mean, I guess he
I would bet that most Americans do not understand that Milley is outside the nuclear command chain.
Yeah, I mean, in practice, Milley might, he would relay the president's orders to the Northcom commander and other commanders, Stratcom commander, to launch the missiles, but he's not. There's no way that he can countermand those. He's just not part of the command chain. It goes, the nuclear command authority starts with the president, then it's the Secretary of Defense, and then it's the Stratcom and Stratcom commander specifically. So that's unprecedented. And then, of course, he called his counterpart, the equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of Communist China, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and told him that in the event Trump was going to go to war against China, that he would give him advance warning. And so basically, if we had a war situation with China, that could cost the lives of millions of Americans, millions of American soldiers and war civilians. So on so many levels, he deserves to be court-martialed. I mean, I would love to see him busted down and ranked to PFC with a dishonorable discharge and a life sentence at Fort Leavenworth military prison. But this part, it actually doesn't. It doesn't necessarily, arguably, does not remove him from legal peril with regards to UCMJ violations. And so I think.
So, would you please explain? I'm going to assume that I have a few people out there in my audience that do not know what what you just said means.
Yes, and Uniform Code of Military Justice is essentially the military laws of war. It's also the laws that govern the United States military. So we have, JAG officers that enforce that. It governs, who can be attacked, in terms of, not killing innocent civilians. So it essentially codifies the laws of war, to the Hague and Geneva Conventions. It also has prescriptions against adultery, of course, treason, and various other offenses for which members of the armed services can be court-martialed. I actually applied to serve as a JAG officer back in 2003 after the Iraq War began, and had a captain's slot available to me that was offered to me by a lieutenant colonel in Maryland at Fort Meade, and my wife vetoed it because we had 3 small children. Because I had been told that I would be shipped to Iraq, within months if I were to recommission. So, that's, as an attorney, that's something that interested me, is pursuing the JAG Corps. Probably what I should have done instead of being an armor officer. Probably would have been better at it, but anyway.
Well, let me ask you this: military. So he could be facing a military tribunal. Here's my question for you: could could Joe Biden possibly, or people within his staff, possibly face a military tribunal as well?
No, there's no precedent for a president or a civilian member of the military command chain to be court-martialed. It only applies to members of the armed services. So that's not possible. But it is possible, because Joe Biden failed to pardon himself. He could certainly be prosecuted. Trump could kind of turn the tables and do to Biden what Biden and Garland did to Trump. But of course, Trump said he's not going to do that, and I think it's that's a healing and unifying statement, even though Biden richly deserves it. I mean, I would love to see Biden prosecuted and imprisoned, at least tried, for all the numerous crimes he's committed against the country. Not to mention his corruption scandals and bribery, including with communist China, even helping to transfer a U.S. military arms company to Chinese control during the late stages of the Obama administration, which had advanced secret or top secret level stealth aircraft technology. So that's
Isn't
something.
it funny how China's stealth aircraft looks a lot like the United States stealth aircraft?
Yeah, and they don't even hide it. They have they have the J-20, which I think is similar to our aircraft, and then the F-20, and then of course their latest, I think it's the J-35. It's uncannily resembling our F-35. So yeah, it's really obvious, and they do a great job. I mean, they reverse engineer our aircraft. They've even reverse engineered designs of weapon systems that we've never built. Literally
Wow.
There are weapon systems that were just in the drawing board that never got past maybe a prototype, or not even the prototype stage, that they've actually weaponized and operationalized. So they've really taken that to the next level. I mean, their technology in many ways exceeds our own militarily.
So they did a much better job than the Russians ever did of stealing our stuff and building it.
Yeah, and it's almost like we let them. Of course, Reagan infamously, gave a lot of advanced military technology to China. When I was 16, I went to Washington, D.C. and went to my congressman's office, and I interrogated him about that. And he lied to my face. He said, no, that story is not true. And, of course, we all know at this point it was true. And then when I was at the Department of Defense, I uncovered confirmation of, I can say this because it was in the public screen, but it was classified, but it had already been made public prior to that, me looking at the files. And basically, the Reagan administration was considering building F-16 and fighters plants and M1 Abrams tank plants in China, and the mistaken belief that they could be made a U.S. ally against the Soviet Union. That was back in let's see, it was 1999 that I looked at those files. So yeah, I mean, we had that. Then of course, Clinton authorized the sharing of GPS technology to make their nuclear missiles a lot more accurate, and of course all their other weapon systems with China. And we've had dual-use military technology transfers going on ever since, unfortunately.
Well, folks, let me quickly mention this. We are looking for your calls at 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. And I know that we've got a few people out there watching, so feel free to call in and ask David Pyne any of your questions. Also, you're listening live now on to KMNU, Main Street Media Utah. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, or X or Twitter, whatever you prefer. And you can go to our website at kmmu.org. Our lowly call screener is looking for you to have your questions asked to David Pyne. That phone number again is 385-899-2134. That's 385-899-2134. Something that I want to get to also, Michael Johnson, House Speaker Michael, I believe it's House Speaker Michael Johnson, came out. I can't remember if it was Sunday or this came out Monday. I heard this talked a lot about Monday, but I'm not sure if it came out Sunday. That he was in a briefing in the White House. He finally got a meeting with Joe Biden in the White House, and he asked Joe Biden. They were going to talk about different things, but he goes, "Hey, President Biden, there's one thing." And if I remember correctly, Biden kicked out a bunch of people and said, "Hey, this is just he and I. We're going to talk. We're the only ones. Just leave us alone." And I can't remember what the subject was, but he goes, "Before you go any further, my people in Louisiana are asking, why did you shut off all of the natural gas. Why did you close down the natural gas?" And he said, and Donald Trump, or excuse me, not Donald Trump, but Joe Biden said, "All I did was authorize a memorandum saying that we would look into it." And he goes, "No, Mr. President, you signed an authorization to shut down the shipment of natural gas outside of Louisiana. Why did you do that?" And he goes, "No, I didn't." And so Michael, in quick synopsis, Michael Johnson said, the bottom line is, he goes, "I honestly believe he did not know that he did that." And he goes, "So what other things were put across his desk for signature?" So that's a question that I have. And I must admit, there's a part of me that goes, Mr. Speaker of the House, why in the world are you waiting to share that on the day before or the day of that Biden's going out of the office? Why didn't you raise Cain a whole lot earlier?
Well, I think Mike Johnson, unfortunately, has proven, he proved an ally of Joe Biden and the Democrats, when he decided to do an about face and support Ukraine aid. I mean, it wasn't just a little bit of aid. He supported the Biden 61 million Ukraine aid package in violation of everything that he's claimed to believe before. I mean, he totally surrendered to and became essentially the first uniparty speaker of the House of Representatives, because what he did, after he did that, there was, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative, Marjorie Taylor Greene, that, sponsored the motion to vacate the Speaker Johnson, and he was rescued. He would have been ousted. I think this was in May of last year. He would have been ousted with 11 Republicans voting against him back when we had, I think, 221 or around that, House members, Republicans. And instead, 165 House Democrats, the vast majority of the Democrat caucus, including Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Hakeem Jeffries, all of them came to his rescue and voted to table that motion. So at that point, he essentially became almost a coalition government speaker, proved that he wasn't as conservative as his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, because Kevin McCarthy, he stood on principle. He said, he knew that he could save his speakership by offering the Democrats a deal, and he refused to do that. Like, he valued principle above his own speakership. And Mike Johnson did the exact opposite. He surrendered, and honestly, I think he did that in exchange for a Democrat promise that in the likely event he was ousted, there was a motion to vacate, the Democrats would vote en masse to save him. So, I guess that's what I'm bringing this up, because that doesn't surprise me that, Mike Johnson would not have brought that up during the campaign to make Biden look bad, because I guess they were buddies behind the scenes. They were kind of allies. Obviously, they didn't agree on every issue, but I mean, Ukraine was a real key issue. Obviously, the socialist spending spree that Congress and the Biden regime were doing. Johnson was all on board with that. And I knew that. I actually supported Johnson initially, because he did seem America. His record was America first right up until that about face. And so that was, when you really like someone and they betray you, kind of stab you in the back like that, it's hard to forget it. You can forgive, but you can't forget. And that's the way I felt. I felt completely betrayed by him. And I think a lot of other American first conservatives do as well. And, I was sorry to see Trump endorse him, because I think we could have done a lot better.
That's part of my problem with Trump, is he seems to have some bad people surrounding him, and he seems to be, now I think he's got some really good people, but he seems to be bringing in some bad people too. So let's hope that we have a much better group of people surrounding President Trump than in years past. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Speaker Johnson over the next couple of years. Also, the fact that there's only 219 Republicans, I think the number is, I think that's concerning. Frankly, I think the Democrats did a bunch of dirty dealing with the elections, a bunch of election integrity, and hopefully we can get that through. I don't know that it will happen, but I would sure like to see it. I do want to hit something. I want to hit one last topic that's kind of out of your two main articles that I want to get to. I want to read. Let's see if I can read. Do you mind if I read your Facebook
Please
post from the 16th? Let's see if I can pull that up really fast. I love how my computer likes to go slow. All right, so here is. Man, I thought I actually. You know what? It did not paste. So I'm just going to synopsize. You put out on February 16th that you were not going to go to the inauguration because of security concerns. And now there's a lot of people in the audience that I'm like, oh, come on, John. There isn't really any security issues that he needs to be worried about. David is just overreacting. Michael Letts didn't go either. I talked to him earlier today, and he said he did not go because of security concerns. He told me, John, bottom line is there were a lot of security issues. So, David, I'm not going to ask you to give away your sources, but share with us why you didn't go with those security concerns. Did I misread your article, and am I misquoting you?
Not at all. Yeah, that's the exact main reason that I chose not to accept the Trump transition invitation for me to attend all the inauguration and various other events, because I mean, it's
and I
obvious.
assume how did you get those? And you got those invitations because of being a Republican delegate, national delegate. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. This is my second time as an alternate national delegate, so I received invitations to attend inauguration, and in my heart, I really wanted to go. It was a proud moment. It was a glorious day for America. I mean, I mean, Trump's not perfect, but man, is he a breath of fresh air. He's moving forward on so many good things. I mean, he kind of, dropped the ball on pro-life issues, but pretty much everything else, he had executive orders ready to go. As as he said, he's in the process of liberating 1,500 J6 hostages at the DC Gulag. That's basically controlled by the liberal mayor of Washington D.C. And the DC police are fighting Trump and U.S. Marshals to try to keep them imprisoned in violation of the president's pardon order. So Trump's doing a lot of good. I didn't see any good on the tariffs. That disappointed me that he's waiting on the tariffs. We need a border adjustment tax. Speaker Ryan had a great idea with the 20% border adjustment tax that Trump could have done. More importantly, he could have done the Reciprocal Tariff Act. He promoted that on his campaign website, that he would match every tariff that China levied against the U.S. dollar for dollar. I mean, that one act alone would largely erase the trade deficit the U.S. has with China, and it would greatly strengthen the U.S. economy while weakening China at the same time. So, other than those two things, I really have to commend President Trump for being really courageous. And of course, he didn't really mention much about Ukraine, and what he did say about Ukraine was wrong. What about Russia and Ukraine? So we can discuss that later. But other than those three things, I just can't commend him enough for just being a really brave and courageous visionary president.
Well, let me real quickly do kind of the top of the hour show mentions. First of all, I want to mention that, folks, you can call in live at 385-899-2134. Today we have a producer, Dwayne, that is just waiting patiently, and he's our lonely call screener right now because he's looking for your calls. You are listening live to KMMU Main Street Media, Utah. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, X, which is obviously X Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and our website at kmmu.org. Always go there to not only see this show, but you can see other shows of ours as well. Also, I really quickly want to give out the, as the top of the hour I like to do traditionally, call it back from my radio days, as it were. I want to give out the show prayer and the show mantra. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. And the show mantra: where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. Folks, that's the key for us making sure that we can get this nation back on track. In my opinion, is we've got to do a better job. I need to sin less, and the bottom line is I'm not going to confess all my sins here, but heaven knows I do. So, David Pyne, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Before we move on, what did you think about his speech and saying the things that he said about the previous administration with all those former presidents being there? Also, real quickly, Michael Letts was like, John, getting those former presidents there was a little bit of insurance that something didn't go wrong.
I was thinking,
would you disagree with that?
No, I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking that, the threat of, the main security concern I was thinking of was the threat of a mass drone attack or even a focused drone attack that would, decapitate the U.S. leadership, including President Trump and possibly even Vice President Vance. But then I thought, it depends what country's doing it, because if it was the deep state obviously wouldn't conduct a drone attack that would potentially kill Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, along with Trump and Vance. So I was pretty sure the deep state wouldn't be behind it. But there's been a lot of evidence that both Iran and communist China have been staging, massive drone incursions over U.S. cities and U.S. military bases. So those were probably the main threats I was concerned about. But in terms of what Trump said during his speech, I thought it was a really good unifying speech. It was really, buttoned down. It wasn't long. It wasn't rambly. It was much shorter than we're used to, and I think it was entirely appropriate. But yeah, I couldn't stop smiling all the times that he was talking about, reversing the Biden-Harris, extreme radical executive orders and all their disastrous policies on a host of issues, including, foreign policy, energy, border security, right down the line. And they couldn't say anything about it. They just had to parse their lips and
I'll tell you, Biden's got a good poker face, and and more to the point, I'm not sure that he's not all there. I actually think he did not want Kamala. I think he was happy that Donald Trump won and not Kamala. I think he's ecstatic at that. But Kamala, her face throughout that entire thing, ooh, that was bitter beer face. That was I'm angry. And I wish we could have had a hot mic on Hillary Clinton to hear what she was saying and who she was talking to.
Well, I saw her talking to George W. Bush, so she seemed like they were good friends and buddies as well. And I thought, well, Bush was probably the worst Republican president we've had in my lifetime by far. So it's not a surprising thing that he's went out of his way to bend over backwards to be bipartisan, and of course he was so destructive to U.S. national security with unilaterally disarming us of 50% of our nuclear weapons, and starting a war in Iraq that's just been so disastrous for U.S. national security, killing 1 million Muslims, and then of course making this announcement that Ukraine would join NATO, that kind of kicked off the current war. Yeah, it would have been interesting to hear what Hillary had to say to him. Of course, Barack Obama and Trump were kind of yucking it up a little bit at the Carter funeral. So I was kind of curious to know what they might have said as well. And I think there were some spoof videos that kind of made up conversations that sounded pretty funny that I saw.
There were some very good spoof videos. I must say that I saw those and I thought those were pretty darn good too. All right, so let's get to your January 8th article, and you can go to David Pyne's Substack at dpyne.substack.com. Go there and find that. So his article on January 8th is entitled "How to Make Trump's Proposal on Canada, Greenland, and Panama Canal a Reality." So there's a couple different. He's got the intro to it. There's a couple other pieces: revitalized Monroe Doctrine, Panama, Greenland, and then a North American Union. Now, I must admit, I have serious concerns about bringing Greenland and Canada into the United States, but getting the Panama Canal, that makes a ton of sense. So where do you want to start, David?
Well, yeah, so I wrote that article. Obviously, Trump had been making statements, it's just the first of the year, I think even just before New Year's, that he wanted to, acquire Greenland, to buy Greenland from Denmark, to retake control of the Panama Canal, not from Panama, but from Communist China, because Communist China, of course, has 2 Panama Canal ports on each side of the canal. And they have hundreds of PLA troops stationed there. They're out of uniform, but they are indeed Chinese troops, and so they have a good military presence there. In the case of war, they would likely deploy additional warships to those ports to seize control of the canal and to use it to sabotage the U.S. war effort,
or they'd sabotage it if they couldn't take control.
That's right. So they could blow up a large ship in the middle of the canal and sink it, and then that would be blocked for weeks or months. So that is probably the most important strategic issue of concern that the president detailed or outlined. And then, of course, his proposal to make Canada 51st state. I was a little offended by that. As a nationalist, American nationalists, I extend that principle of nationalism to other nations. So I always try to, especially with the case, with Russia or even China, I try to look through, be in their shoes and kind of understand the way they think. And, how would we feel if we were next to a country that had, 9 times more people than we did and a much more massive military and, of course, nuclear forces, the third largest in the world. And we're like, and Canada was like, oh, let's just annex the U.S. and make them a Canadian province. It was bad optics. He could have gone about that a lot better. But I do think that the idea of a closer, military alliance and even limited economic integration, perhaps a customs union, I think that would be ideal. With Canada, increased U.S. basing, military basing in Canada, I think that would be good. But even from a political perspective, a union with Canada doesn't make that much sense because, of course, they've elected a lot of socialists to lead Canada as prime minister. And
Right.
those are potential, if we welcomed 7 Canadian provinces into the union, I think they actually have more. They're the 7 provinces, and then they have some other entities in addition. That's potentially another 10 Democrats, potential states, and obviously some of those are more conservative. Maybe like Alberta and mainly like Alberta and some of maybe Saskatchewan or something. But that's potential threat, that could ensure a Democrat lock on Congress,
Right,
not to
right.
mention
That's
the
my
electoral
biggest
college
concern.
that elects our president. So that would be a risky endeavor, to say the least. So my proposal for Canada would be a North American Union, and the North American Union concept would not include Mexico. We don't want Mexico to join the North American Union. We'd want Canada and Greenland. Greenland, of course, if we couldn't acquire it, if they didn't have a referendum to join the U.S. But I think if we did that, and Canada retained veto authority on any North American Union decisions, I think that's something that they might welcome, actually, if we presented it correctly, and especially where they're on the verge of electing a new conservative party prime minister in the October 2025 Canadian parliamentary elections. So that could give us an opportunity. But if Trump continues to, just kind of be ham-fisted and say all these dumb things about, let's annex Canada, let's make the 51st state, that's just going to harden. I mean, their incoming prime minister is a nationalist and a patriot as well. And
Right.
they support, he supports MAGA, he supports Trump, but that just would be offensive and not the way to go. But there's a better way to do it. So that's what my article is about. And then finally, with regards to Greenland, it's kind of a 2-step process. We first support the Greenlandic, prime minister's his idea to have a referendum for independence. And Trump could simply tweet this, on Truth Social. I guess tweet's not the right word, but to post on Truth Social that he strongly supports an independence referendum, and that the U.S., by Greenland, and that the U.S. would guarantee Greenland's independence militarily from Denmark. And that would give, Denmark couldn't do much against that if Greenland's prime minister followed through on his idea to have that referendum. Then it would be a done deal. Essentially, Greenland would become independent at that point, and he could make that conditional upon Greenland joining a North American Union with the U.S. and ideally Canada, or alternatively, he could just say become independent, and then once they were independent, then the second step would be, okay, now we want you to have a second referendum, and this referendum is whether Greenland wants to become a U.S. Commonwealth model with the same rights and self-rule, autonomy as Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
And that, of course, would be, tax-free, no federal income taxes, but, of course, not much representation in Congress, either no voting rights. And I think not, no ability to vote in federal elections, including for president. But they would have the self-rule. The self-rule is what's most critically important to them. And then, of course, they would have, much greater security. Even if they didn't join a North American Union, if they were independent, we would take over their security, and we could deploy, as many military forces as we wanted to, bases there, while ensuring and guaranteeing their independence in terms of, domestically, politically, economically, and, kind of doing business deals to develop their natural resources. But as far as, before the second referendum, I think Trump would be really smart to say, if you choose, if Greenland votes for independent, or rather union with the U.S. as a Commonwealth, then the U.S. will pay every Greenland citizen $1 million. So that would be for $56+ billion. We could make that offer, and they'd be stupid not to take it.
Wow. Especially if it goes directly to the citizen themselves.
That's right.
I might become a Greenland citizen before that happens.
Yeah, I think we both try to move there, right?
And then I'd move back, of course.
Yeah.
All right. So I've had this question asked of me, and I don't know that I've ever answered it well since the Greenland situation has come up. Why? Why would the United States want Greenland? What's other than, hey, we want to get some more ground? What is the strategic purposes of getting Greenland? Would you speak to that? Because I've had some people, I've tried to answer it, but listen, when I've got an expert like you, I'm going to let you answer it.
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, President Truman, he first explored the idea of the U.S. buying Greenland from Denmark in, I think it was 1946. He actually made an offer of 100 million gold to Denmark in 1951. And, that's the equivalent of $1.5 trillion today. So that was, not chump change, even by the standards of the 1950s. But, Greenland, of course, during World War II, Greenland and Iceland, were kind of important naval bases in eastern Greenland and Iceland against German U-boats, for example. During the Cold War, it was kind of the same thing. Some of the important naval routes that, the Soviet Navy might use to get to the North Atlantic were kind of along those areas. And then, but even more importantly, in terms of early warning detection systems for a nuclear missile attack from the Soviet Union or today the Russian Federation, we have some bases there. We have Thule Air Force Base. So ballistic missile early warning. If we had ballistic missile defenses there, they potentially could be in range of incoming Russian missiles if they were long range enough. But then I think the main argument today is, that we're, Russia is kind of the predominant Arctic power because it has such a long coastline in the Arctic. And that's becoming more and more important because the kind of some alternate, shipping routes for international commerce are along the Arctic coast, and that's developing. It's not really the main shipping route, but especially with the Houthis essentially shutting down traffic with the Suez Canal and the Red Sea. That traffic is having to go around the Cape of Great Hope, and it's taking 50-60% longer time-wise to get to their destination between Europe and Asia. Whereas if the Arctic sea lanes were open, then the routes would be far shorter and quicker. So I think that's kind of the mentality. I think part of that mentality is a little bit skewed, I think, in the wrong direction, because I don't think, the idea should not be that Russia is going to be a permanent enemy. We've made them an enemy with our stupid foreign policies. But, Trump initially, certainly in 2016, I think even a lot more so than now, he campaigned on a permanent peace deal with Russia. and he was going to implement that, and really turn Russia from an enemy to a friend. And he was derailed from doing that by the Democrats, the globalists, the deep state that wants to make Russia a permanent enemy. A lot of the same deep state folks that were trying to do a Russian reset, much more sensible things. I mean, heck, I think it was, Ted Kennedy and folks like that used to run for president on the Democrat side. And they bragged about how, the Soviets basically endorsed them and said, this is a guy we can work with, it's hard to remember those days when it was a good thing that you could work with the Russians, you could negotiate with the Russians. And now, Biden basically campaigned on, we're going to refuse to talk to Russia at all in a 3-year-long diplomatic tamper tantrum because they dared to invade Ukraine in a limited invasion when he said don't. That was supposed to put the fear of God into the word don't.
Yeah. Well, okay. So when it comes to that invasion and stopping talking, not having communications for 3 years between two presidents, the three main nuclear powers of the world, two of the three, for us to not be having conversations with them, I think is absolutely insane.
It is absolutely insane. And, especially when, it just would have taken, a short period of time to resolve this diplomatically, certainly before the war, could have been resolved diplomatically in a single phone call with the written guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. That was Putin's price essentially for not invading. It was a very low cost price that, we could easily pay because, Biden himself behind the scenes was telling Zelensky, you're probably never joining NATO. So we just want to let you know that, but we're going to keep pretending that you are to keep you dependent on the U.S. for your security. And he's gone along with that because he's made off like a bandit by, getting up to $1 billion for his own personal embezzlement funds that he stole from U.S. taxpayers. But yeah, that's always been a facade. I was dismayed to find out that, Trump hasn't reached out to Putin, or, the Trump administration hasn't really talked with the Russian government, even as late as yesterday. So, he's not really made any progress in terms of, ending the war in 24 hours like he promised he would.
Okay. Real quickly, I want to mention again, I'm going to give David's bio here in just a moment, but folks, you are listening to KMMU or watching KMMU, whatever the case may be, Main Street Media, Utah. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, X, and Twitter, and our website is kmmu.org. Please go to any one of those, and you can find past shows where David and I have spoken before in the past. You can see how right he is, which is pretty darn accurate, as well as you can also call us today at 385-899-2134. Look forward to having you folks join us. Now, real quickly, also, I want to just go over David's bio again real quickly. David's a former U.S. Army combat and let me start that over. U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters Staff Officer who was in charge of armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, the Eastern Europe, and Middle East and Africa and the Americas from 2000 to 2003. He has an MA in National Security Studies. He also is David T. Pyne, Esquire. He also was advisor at one point in time to Vivek Ramaswamy. And he is the executive director of Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He also serves as member of the Committee on Present Danger of China. And then he also has co-authored the best-selling book, Catastrophe Now, America's Last Chance to Avoid an EMP Disaster. And in March or April, he will be publishing a book, Restoring Strategic Deterrence. And that book, like he said earlier, will be out in March or April. Please go to his Substack at dpyne.substack.com. And let me tell you, he definitely is worth following. He's someone that I follow monthly, and sometimes more often than monthly. All right. Well, shall we pivot now over to how to end the Ukraine war in days, not months? An article that I believe you're having coming out tonight or in the next short period of time. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I actually published the WorldNet Daily version of the article yesterday. So that got published by WorldNet Daily. I published there off and on for the last 20 years. They're really good. They're really nice to me. They always publish my stuff. Some other news outlets that shall go unnamed either no longer or don't publish my stuff. And so I end up publishing on the Real War newsletter. And one of the issues I have is one of the reasons I haven't published so much on other websites is because they have these constraints of 750 words. I mean, 1,000 words. You just can't really, no matter what your title is or the subject matter is, it's really hard to publish anything of substance, that's solution oriented with such space constraints. And so that's why I haven't published on other sites all that much. I did publish extensively on the national interest from 2018 to 2023, at which point they adopted a much more neoconservative bent, whereas previously they were foreign policy realists and open to new ideas. And so I really appreciated that. Really sad to see them make that change editorially. But this article is in some ways kind of an update of an article I posted back in August, and that was in collaboration with Chet Nagel, who's a former Cuban Missile Crisis U.S. Navy pilot. He actually flew over Cuba during the crisis, the standoff with the Soviet Navy, and also served in the CIA, and I think as a Reagan administration official as well. And we wrote this article that was essentially how Trump could end the war in 24 hours, to make good on his promise. And it offered, real concrete solutions for how to do that in terms of specific terms that should be minimally acceptable, not just to the U.S. and Ukraine, but to Russia as well. Because a lot of people don't realize, because we don't hear it in the Western media, Russia's winning the war. It shouldn't be news.
We're told that they're losing the war by just about everybody. That Russia's losing the war. So you're saying that that Russia's winning the war, not Ukraine, right?
That's right. I mean, they've really been winning the war since the day they invaded. A lot of people forget that Russia had the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv surrounded within the first few days of the war, and the only reason that stopped happening was because Ukraine initialed a piece of paper called the Istanbul Agreement, which basically satisfied all of Russia's concerns in terms of Ukraine's geopolitical orientation to the Western powers, in which Russia agreed to pull out all of its troops from pre-war controlled Ukraine to its February 24th, 2022 positions. And Putin made this really horrible error on Russia's part of trying to implement that before the meeting with Zelensky was scheduled to take place on April 9th, which was a formal signing ceremony in which a permanent ceasefire would be achieved along with this comprehensive peace agreement. And, so he ordered Russian forces withdrawn, but, Russia, of course, invaded with only 190,000 troops. That was a clear indicator that Putin had no intention of occupying or conquering Ukraine, because he would have needed at least 500,000 troops, by my estimation, to accomplish that. But he did succeed in occupying 30% of Ukraine during the initial days before Russian troops were withdrawn from 3 northern Ukrainian oblasts or regions. And, essentially what the peace agreement entails is it's really along the lines of the Istanbul Agreement that I proposed, which was actually, I would assess, it constituted a smashing victory for Ukraine, because Ukraine was really on the ropes, and it wasn't. Those troops weren't withdrawn for any military reason. They were unilaterally withdrawn in the face of a Ukrainian army that was still a ragtag force. They were still in the process of being mobilized. They didn't have any capabilities to conduct major counteroffensives. They had really small counteroffensives in the Kyiv region, but they had no capability of dislodging Russian troops. And so, that was really that incident where Russia, where Putin ordered the Russian troops withdrawn from basically 40% of Russian occupied territory in Ukraine. That was a real game changer for my geopolitical thinking, because I'd spent my entire life believing that post Cold War Russia was still aggressively oriented to the U.S., that they wanted to reconstitute the Soviet Empire, that Putin had a plan to invade Ukraine, for 2 decades. And I even wrote that, and I think it was in January of 2022. And that proved me wrong, and I proved me wrong in a major way. And so I did a deep dive into what precipitated Putin's decision to do that. And, obviously I've been reading and understanding various things, from one of my mentors, Dr. Peter Pry, who served as a previous executive director of the Task Force on National Security, as our founder before his tragic death to cancer in 2022. And, Dr. Pry had stated that, Russia was, they had legitimate security concerns about NATO. I thought, NATO is a benign force. I kind of bought the Kool-Aid that, NATO is a benign force. They're a defensive alliance, even though they invaded, and bombed a bunch of countries during beginning of the 1990s, that they they weren't offensively aimed against Russia. And I found out that a lot of that was untrue. And so, Russia's primary reason for invading Ukraine was to kind of roll back NATO expansion into Ukraine that occurred under the Biden regime in the first year, with the signing of 2 strategic partnership agreements between the U.S. and Ukraine, one of which was a military strategic partnership agreement. The other one was kind of a political one. And, I think that was legitimate. And I've said since then that I think, while I condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I do think it was primarily a strategic defensive operation on their part. And the cause was just. And I, of course, I've always said Ukraine's war on their end was a just cause, just cause of self-defense. But, there's just been no reason to prolong the war. I mean, the only reason to prolong the war, the stated reason, of course, is to weaken Russia. Right. And as I write in my full article that I'm hoping to publish tonight or early tomorrow on my Real War Substack at dpyne.substack.com, that mission has completely failed. Russia, during the last 3 years, has gone from the 6th largest economy to the 4th largest economy above Japan and Germany. No one thought that was going to happen, but all three economic estimators from the IMF, the CIA World Factbook, the World Bank, all of which are saying that that's true. And of course, Russia's military is larger than it's been in 25 years, I think. They've expanded their military to Soviet era levels. They've expanded their percentage of military spending as percentage of their GDP is over doubled from 3%, I think close to 6.5%. That's also Soviet era level. Their military production in many weapon systems exceeds all of NATO combined, the US and NATO combined. Wow. So 32 different countries, they produce more, certainly a lot more artillery shells, probably 3 or 4 times more. And then tanks, they produce more tanks, about 1,500 a year. The US builds very few tanks, and European militaries. I mean, some of those countries, even like France and Britain, have maybe 150 tanks max each. So NATO's military forces are kind of paper militaries. They're really what Colonel Douglas McGregor talks about as parade militaries. They're ceremonial. Essentially, they can march in formation and drive down a street and not a whole lot else. So if if U.S. and Russia were to get into a war, I mean, Russia would most definitively win. Not saying they would occupy Eastern Europe necessarily, but they could quite easily defeat NATO in a war, certainly with a cyber attacks. But
real quickly, forgive me. As you can see, right now we have David Pyne's Substack up. So this is dpyne.substack.com for David Pyne. So that's dpyne.substack.com. We have that up right now, and for your viewing ability to see his Substack. Now, pardon me for interrupting, but I wanted to call that out to the audience attention that's what we have showing.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and by the way, Dr. John Mearsheimer has been recommending my Substack for some years now. So I added him as a reader, and he apparently likes what I have to say because I'm in his top 3 recommendations. Dr. Mearsheimer, of course, is he's the premier foreign policy realist scholar of the U.S. and has been for many years. And he predicted, he said that in 2014, if the with the Maidan coup that where the CIA financed and backed the Maidan revolution, Maidan coup that overthrew the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, that if we continue that policy, that Russia would respond by essentially wrecking Ukraine, perhaps invading Ukraine just beyond Crimea, and that's exactly what occurred. So he was kind of he was very prescient with regards to that prediction. But returning to my peace plan, it's an 8-point peace plan, and it it's again, it was the 8-point peace plan was originally published in August. I've had multiple peace plans. Some are comprehensive, lots of different variations, but this is the most simplified. So this is the one I reference the most. And
can I share a couple highlights from this article that stood out to me?
Absolutely.
There's a few things that stood out to me that the audience may know, but I guarantee you there are plenty that don't. To your statement of Russia's winning the war and not the Ukrainians. Ukraine has suffered over 1 million casualties since the beginning of the war. That is a huge number of their percentage of population. That'd be like America losing what? 5 times that amount, if not more people. I mean, that's just that
would be the equivalent of the U.S. losing 10 million killed and wounded in battle.
Wow. So and Putin has been one of your statements in here, as you've been sharing with us already, and I'm going to let you take back over. But Putin's been salivating for peace since 2002 or 2022 on this. So sorry, David, those were just 2 things that kind of stood out to me that I wanted to point out to the audience.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. So, and that was reported by the Atlanticist, New York Times. So, very pro-war, very pro-Ukraine war, very anti-Russia, and they're the ones that reported that. So that they quoted a U.S. official saying that Putin was salivating for peace as he saw that the Istanbul Agreement was only 1 week from signing, and he was excited to end the war. We've heard multiple times the lie that, well, we can't negotiate with Putin because he doesn't want peace. He wants to keep fighting the war. I mean, it's the exact opposite. Everything we're told, it's so Orwellian. It's like black and white. The sun is up when it's down. Just complete lies. And unfortunately, it appears that President Trump has begun to be infected with some of the neocon lies, with some statements that he made during his press conference in the White House Oval Office just last night, that I'm going to report on in this new article. And a couple of those statements, he said that
I'd love to hear what some of those wrong statements were.
Yeah. So he stated that Russia is destroying itself by refusing a peace deal, and literally from February 25th onward, February 25th, 2022, Russia has declared itself, it's declared its terms. It said it's ready for peace. It wants to end the war. I mean, it seems ironic that the country that invaded, that was the aggressor nation formally, would want to end a war after one day. But they literally said, the Russian foreign ministry said, there's 4 terms, essentially. Here's what they are. And once those terms are accepted by Ukraine, all Russian troops will be withdrawn. So, today the situation's a little different. They did exactly what I warned they would do in April 2022, which is if the U.S. and the West refuse to negotiate a peace deal with Russia ending the war, that Russia would respond by simply annexing the 4 Ukrainian regions. And that's exactly what they did 5 months later. I don't know if anyone else that predicted that they were going to do that, but I did. I actually wrote an article for the National Interest that said that, and they rejected it. So I had to self-publish it. But I reported it.
Why do you think you were able to predict that when others weren't?
Well, I mean, there were indications and warnings that they were potentially preparing to either annex them or to kind of transform them into people's republics along the lines of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. So I did have that information, and I wasn't the only one that had that information. But I think a lot of people just, had that same mentality. Ukraine is winning the war. Russia's defeat was imminent. I mean, that's the line we heard from the Biden-Harris regime for 3 years. And, so just in terms of my background as a national security strategist, with, a deep background into Russian thinking, I was able to predict that, and some other things that occurred. But, and of course, I predicted the invasion of Ukraine. Dr. Peter Pry, didn't think that Russia would invade. Some of our best thinkers, I think, including Dr. John Mearsheimer, didn't think Russia would invade, and they did. In terms of other peace terms, I think so neutrality is key. But I actually think that we could move that back a little bit. So we could commit Ukraine to not join NATO. But we could say, non-NATO major ally status or major non-NATO ally status. That's something we've offered to like Egypt, Argentina, different countries like that. It's not a formal military alliance, but it's kind of like a step towards that. It's kind of a next tier. And I think that's something Russia could accept because they pretty much made clear that it's not NATO membership itself that they have the biggest problem with. It's the NATO military presence in country. So if we could commit to them, and it's too late now, they never accept it now. But if we could essentially say, okay, Ukraine will remain militarily and geopolitically aligned with the West, but we won't, we'll abide to whatever the weapons limits that we agree to. We'll sell them weapons, but not in excess of those limits, not with the ranges that you don't like. But we won't have any troops there, no aircraft, no bases. We'll withdraw all our biolabs, all our CIA bases that have been reported by the New York Times or Washington Post. And, I think that would be a deal I think that would be a face saver for the U.S., so Trump could say, I didn't lose the war. We got to keep Ukraine as a military ally. I mean, that's kind of a key thing.
Okay, so Biden has promised F-16s and M1 Abrams to Ukraine. One of the things about you can promise the F-16s, but it takes a while for those pilots to get trained in that aircraft. Do we have Ukrainian pilots flying F-16s yet?
Yeah, and they've done a really bad job of it. They've proven that the learning curve is really, really hard. I mean, just right off the bat, within I think weeks or even days of Ukrainians flying F-16s, there was a fatal crash or shoot down, and they basically grounded the F-16s. I haven't heard of Ukrainian F-16s flying. It's kind of like a more extreme version of the German fleet being bottled up, the High Seas fleet being bottled up, during World War I, having the second largest navy, but Britain just, had naval supremacy over them. In the case of Ukraine, they've got at least 12, Russia's got at least 12 times more fighter jets than Ukraine does. So, anything Ukraine flies, not to mention the most advanced, air defense system in the world, which really gets them aligned.
Okay, whoa. You just said most advanced air defense system in the world. That means more, I interpret that as meaning more advanced than the United States air defense.
They have the most advanced and comprehensive air and missile defense system in the world. They have the largest national missile defense system by far, probably about 225 times more missile defense interceptors than we do in terms of nuclear missile defense. Even in terms of conventional air defense, they have more advanced systems than we do with longer ranges. It's true that they don't always operate to their capabilities in terms of intercepts, but lately the intercepts have been way higher. And so, Ukraine, for example, they'll launch ATACMS and all of them will get shot down. I mean, there were a couple main targets they attacked, and literally it was 100% shoot down rate. So that there's, the Russian shoot down rate has only increased with time, despite the fact that the U.S. has armed Ukraine with more advanced and longer range missile capabilities.
Okay, and then the M1 Abrams. Are they operating the M1 Abrams?
Yeah, so they had the M1 Abrams. They have a battalion. They only have one battalion, so it's 31 tanks we transferred. That's what a Ukrainian battalion has. Our battalions are in excess of 40. There's a 31. And they had a lot of losses. I mean, I think it was, one of the recent May Day parades. I think it was the last May Day parade. They had a captured M1 that was on parade. So they had, various U.S. weapon systems, of which the Abrams, I think, was the biggest prize on parade. It was ridiculous. The editor of the National Interest, he stated that, Western tanks would be a game changer, enabling Ukraine to defeat the the largest nuclear power in the world, with 35 times more territory, 5 times more people, right down the line. It's just absurd, the idea that Ukraine could ever defend or defeat Russia. I mean, 315 of the best army divisions in the world couldn't defeat the Soviet Union in World War II. So why should we assume that Ukraine, which is, it's a good, I mean, it's by European standards, it's certainly a strong force, stronger than Germany, Britain, or France in terms of conventional military forces, but still pales, in terms of a comparison to the Russian forces. The interesting thing is Ukraine actually outnumbered, they had Russian forces in Ukraine outnumbered by 3-1 during most of 2022, and Russia was still able to achieve major successes militarily. But now Ukrainian forces have decimated, as you mentioned, 1 million Ukrainian troops killed or wounded. They've gone down from 1.2 million troops to about 350,000 today.
Wow.
And, in terms of active duty, troops that are, deployable to the front or even in rear areas. And, that's not sufficient to defend all of Ukraine's front lines. Literally, if Putin gave the order tomorrow, he could stage a general offensive of northern Ukraine that would roll up, most Ukrainian army forces and force them minimally to retreat behind the Dnipro River line, which could potentially trigger a NATO response.
Let me, so I don't know if you've seen it, but our producers putting a couple things up in chat. So I want to give credit where credit's due so I don't sound smart unduly. Dwayne put up, there are Abrams tanks already in Ukraine. The United States sent 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine in January 2023. The first tanks arrived in September 2023. As of September 2024, over 20 of the tanks were thought to have been destroyed, disabled, or captured. So apparently 30 tanks haven't helped much over there. Now,
Yeah, so Russia is the premier tank power on Earth. I mean, they started the war with like something around 15,000 T8, let's see, T-72B tanks or better. So 15,000 modern tanks, a lot of which were in reserve, admittedly, and they've had to kind of reactivate and refurbish them. But
Did you
they're
say
never going to
50,000
run out of
tanks?
tanks.
Did you say
Unlike Ukraine,
50,000 tanks?
15,000.
Oh, 15,000. Sorry.
Yeah, at the end of the Cold War, they had 50,000. Now they only have 15,000, but that's way more than us. I think that's about double as many tanks as we have, and it's about 4 times more tanks than European NATO, other than if you exclude Turkey. So
Okay.
again, major advantage for Russia on that one.
Something I want to say to Europe. Um, this is one thing that I hope Trump will do. Listen, we're sick and tired of funding your socialist ways by us sending over our military. It's time for you guys to stand on your own 2 feet. And the bottom line is Russia's going to run right over the top of you, probably before they come over and after the United States. If they decide to nuke the United States first, we're not going to be any help anyways.
Yeah, and the dangers of cyber attack are even greater because literally Russia or China, they don't have to invade us at all. They don't have to send a single soldier or a single missile. All they have to do is conduct a full-scale, massive, nationwide cyber attack, and they can take out the U.S. and NATO no problem in one day. And that after that, it would be just a slow collapse. I mean, the U.S. government would cease its ability to function. The nation would, tens of millions of Americans would begin to starve in place. The transportation system would shut down. No food distribution or water purification or distribution system. We just don't realize how fragile our society is, and especially the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is one of the most advanced and technologically advanced and digitized countries in the world. We're more vulnerable to that than anyone, essentially. And
Right.
Russia and China have hardened their critical infrastructure against the dangers of cyber and super EAP attack, but we haven't. So we essentially, I'd like to say that the U.S. Lives in a glass house, so to speak. And so when you live in a glass house, you don't want to be throwing rocks at everyone, but that's exactly what Biden has been doing with the support of neocon Republican warmongers. And all they have to do is throw rocks back at us, and they're going to shatter our glass house and bring America's empire crashing down. And I don't want to see that.
Well, we're coming up on 6 o'clock. So if you want to go a few minutes later, I'd be happy to. But what points do you want to get across to the audience? And then if we have time, I'd like to hear who you think are the best the best people with Trump and the worst. Unfortunately, Vivek may not be there anymore. He is no longer officially part of Doge. Now, that might be a good thing. We'll see, because of what he might be doing. So I do want to hit good and bad people, the good and the baddies for Trump before we finish up, if you can.
Yeah, I was sorry to see Vivek go. He's leaving Doge. I always knew that was a power imbalance. Elon Musk, as much of a red personality that Vivek is, he just can't. I mean, Elon Musk wields a tremendous amount of influence over the president that Vivek just couldn't match. And the idea of putting 2 red personalities in charge of an agency, that just never seemed like it was going to work out. So I thought that was a bit of a mismatch with Vivek as a kind of a co-director of that agency. But I'm pleased to hear that he's likely to run for governor. I think that will position him well for presidential or vice presidential races or picks down the line. And he's a young guy. He's like 39 years old, so he's got a bright future ahead of him. But he did make some comments that kind of caused him to be pushed out prematurely out of Doge and maybe out of the Trump orbit. But in terms of good people that Trump picks, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, she really stands out, Director of National Intelligence. She's been helping to lead the charge against the war in Ukraine, the madness of, provoking Russia, World War III with Russia, So she's completely in line with Trump's thinking. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, he's less outspoken, but kind of has the same positions. So I think he's a real solid pick. Sorry to see that Matt Gaetz, didn't last very long. He really flamed out early on as Attorney General. Of course, he wouldn't have had much impact in foreign policy from that position. In terms of bad people, I mean, Michael Waltz, probably one of the worst. Stefanik Waltz, of course, is National Security Advisor. I think he's really likely the main guy. Him and Keith Kellogg, who was a really horrible pick by Trump for special envoy to Russia and Ukraine. I think those are the two, probably the worst picks that are telling all these lies and misinformation on Ukraine. One of the other things that Trump stated, he claimed that 1 million Russian troops have been killed in battle. I think that the total is actually 85,000, 100,000 based on my sources. So
wow,
literally 10 plus times less.
Yeah.
And the danger of accepting that kind of misinformation from your neocon advisors is that you kind of believe that Russia's on the ropes. And so if Russia's really on the ropes, that means they're desperate for peace. And if they're desperate for peace, then you can kind of dictate terms. It's a defeated power. You can dictate terms to them. But he doesn't understand that Russia's the victorious power, the one that's winning the war on the verge of forcing the Ukrainian military collapse, then he's likely to overreach. Again, with unacceptable terms to Russia. As the Kellogg peace plan has it has some good, really good terms, but overall it has a lot of unacceptable terms to Russia. One of the worst terms was the idea that we would send tens of thousands of NATO troops as peacekeepers to patrol a new DMZ with Russia and Ukraine. And I mean, that's literally the reason that Putin invaded Russia, is to expel NATO forces. Because we had troops, we had like 1,200, I think over 1,000 NATO troops inside Ukraine before Russia invaded. So now we're gonna make that 20,000, perhaps. 20 times more. I mean, Russia can, to quote Captain America from Captain America's Civil War. They can do this all day.
Right.
They can keep fighting the war in Ukraine all day. They're kind of in the position of the U.S. during World War II. They have all the resources. They have one of the most formidable military production capabilities in the world, second only to China. So they can build massive amounts of tanks, aircraft, missiles, drones, everything they need. They have all the strategic resources, and they have China's backing. So China is basically giving them Lend-Lease. The U.S. infamously, we gave Lend-Lease to the Soviets to help them overrun Eastern Europe and East Asia. And now China is doing the same thing for Russia in this war in Ukraine. So, they have everything they need to keep fighting, and really they could overrun all of Ukraine if they want to. They now have the troops to do so. And Putin just doesn't. This war is not about territory. We've heard repeatedly over the last 3 years the lie that Putin invaded Ukraine to conquer and annex the entire country, and there's literally been zero evidence of that. He's had so many opportunities since he withdrew Russian forces from Kyiv to reinvade Kyiv, to occupy northern Ukraine, where there's very few Ukrainian brigades to defend the front lines. And even if he did, he could even do that to, launch a major invasion to divert Ukrainian forces from the main front, and then perhaps take over southeast Ukraine anyway. So there's all kinds of things that he could have done. The Russian generals have wanted him to launch general offensives, and we haven't seen a Russian general offensive on a large scale almost since the beginning of the war. Really since April of 2022.
So last thoughts you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just really appreciate everything you do, to kind of inform our citizens. I mean, there's so many threats, whether it's, political, Biden regime threats, or other countries. So I really appreciate you having me on the show. I guess, the biggest note I want to say is, President Trump, during his inauguration, he restored a lot of hope. So I think to a lot of Americans, not just myself. I was really pessimistic about our America's chances. In fact, when Biden won the election in November of 2020, I literally posted on Facebook. I said, I think the chances are that the U.S. won't survive Biden's first term. And I was been very pleasantly surprised that we did. It's almost a miracle. It's literally almost an act of God. Especially where Trump was spared, being killed with the first assassination attempt, where he turned his head just as it was. It would have gone through his head if it had been like an inch and a half, less than an inch, I think.
Yeah, I want to say it was they said a centimeter or something along those lines.
Yeah, it was like 20 centimeters. So it was like 4/5 of an inch. It would have been fatal, and we would have had a dead president. DeSantis would probably be president right now. But that was, probably an act of God. And
okay, so real quickly, you think DeSantis would have been president over even Biden being able to have a second term?
Oh yeah.
You think Biden was?
Yeah, Biden was. I mean, it was a done deal that, if the Democrats were going to steal the election from Donald Trump, there's no way they would have stolen it from DeSantis. DeSantis would have been the next guy. As I went to the Republican convention, if that was kind of a funeral dire, that I think DeSantis would have been the guy that we would have nominated at convention. And I think it would have been great. But, President Trump is great. He's got so many good ideas. He's really passionate about peace, and pretty articulate, but he's surrounded himself with some, deep state folks that we've mentioned, in addition. So there's Waltz, there's Kellogg, and the Rubio is not great. And there's some others like, Stefanik, of course, as UN ambassador, but, I'm hopeful that he'll listen to Vance, JD Vance. I mean, he could literally, I think that Vance is better than Vivek. I think he was really just top on my list for who he could pick. And so if he listens to JD Vance, especially on Ukraine, I think he can't go wrong. But if he keeps listening to Waltz and Kellogg, I see a real risk that this could go south, and the war might not end, and he might actually follow through in his threat to actually send a massively more military aid to Ukraine than Biden did. And if that's the case, Russia might choose to just say, screw it, we're just going to cyber attack you and wipe you off the map. So it's not over yet. I remain hopeful overall, but a lot of Trump's recent statements have created a lot of skepticism on my end that maybe peace is not going to happen with Russia.
Well, folks, you've been listening to David Pyne. David Pyne, you can go to his Substack at dpyne.substack.com. David, once again, I want to say thank you so much for joining us here on Talk with John on KMMU, Main Street Media, Utah. I really appreciate you joining us with us monthly. And you've even shared from time to time if we've got some big things that are happening, maybe happening in Taiwan. It was good to see that nothing wound up coming there. Nothing happened. Fortunately, it's somewhat quiet there. That China didn't decide to invade before the election. So I'm hoping that we've got a chance at peace, just like you. I'm hoping we have that still. So just thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you, folks. You've been here at Main Street Media, kmmu.org, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. David, have a great week. Thank you so much, and have a good evening, my friend.
Thank you. You have a great evening as well.
All right. Folks, We'll see you next.